All right, Nick, what do these names have in common, real quick? Okay. Allen Iverson, Benjamin Franklin, Michael Jack Schmidt, Harry Callis, and Rocky Balboa.
I would say they're all Philly people.
That you would be correct. And we have another Philly person that's going to be hopping on the podcast with us here. He is the host of one of my favorite shows in the afternoon on CNN at 4 p.m. The Lead with Jake Tapper. But he's also here to promote his new book, which you can see over my right shoulder if you're watching on YouTube. And that is All the Demons Are Here. New York Times bestselling author Jake Tapper joins us. Jake, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
It's great to be with a couple Jersey boys. How you doing?
Oh, there we go. Well, thank you so much for that. It's been fun to watch your career evolve, and also this other side project that you tend to do, Jake, where you've written 3 books. All of them are doing incredibly well. I've been watching you on this book tour, and one of the things that has always made me laugh has been people saying to Jake Tapper, where do you find the time? How do you write a book? As if you can't walk and chew gum. Are you shocked by how many questions you've gotten from Whoopi Goldberg to Conan O'Brien about where do you find the time to do your day job, save democracy, interview, Mr. Zelensky from Ukraine, and then also write a best-selling thriller?
No, I mean, and I get asked it a lot. And mainly like in my normal life, not in interviews. People really are curious. And I think one of the reasons people ask is because everybody thinks that they have in them the great American novel. And they really might. The difference is that I actually sit down and try to write it, even though I do have this full-time job and a family. And so I think that is what is at the root of it, is because a lot of people are capable of writing a great book. And I think a lot of people have great stories to tell, but often the difference is just doing the work and making yourself do the work. So I think that's fundamentally what's behind the question, is people thinking, God, I should write a book, but I never find that I have enough time. How does he have enough time to do it?
The advice for the people out there that have always wanted to start something, I always say, do or do not. There is no try, to quote Yoda. Let's get into the book, Jake, because this is the 3rd installment of the book. I told you off air that, I'm not a big fiction guy like you. I'm very into biographies, documentaries, and things like that. But I read this book, and the parallels between things that happened in the 70s in the political arena and what's happening now. You wrote such a great job around these fictitious family, the Martyr family, and Ike and Lucy specifically as a subject matters in this book. And, both of them are going through different career trajectories. One's a reporter at a burgeoning paper. The other one is with Evel Knievel doing stunts and motorcycle. Take our audience a little bit inside this book and the 3rd installment and the series overall.
So the series started, I wrote a book called The Hellfire Club. It came out in 2018. And that was about Charlie Martyr, a young congressman kind of swept up into Joe McCarthy's Washington, D.C., along with his wife, Margaret, a zoologist. The next book was called The Devil May Dance. It came out in 2021. And that book was about Charlie and Margaret go to Hollywood and investigate to see if Sinatra is actually mobbed up or not. And that book was there's some politics in it in terms of like whether or not it was about, in some ways, when it comes to politics, the people you get in bed with to become a politician. But that was a lot about Hollywood and a lot about, making movies and Sinatra and the Rat Pack and that sort of thing. This book takes place in 1977, and it's like, as you noted, it's Ike and Lucy. Ike's an AWOL Marine, and Lucy is an aspiring journalist who she ends up working on a new tabloid newspaper being started in Washington, D.C. by a Rupert Murdoch-esque character who comes to the United States to start a media empire. And she's, on one level, it's a whodunit because she's covering a serial killer and she's trying to figure out who the serial killer is. On another level, it's about the tabloidization of American media and decisions and compromises that we all make when we enter careers. Ike's story is a little bit wilder. As you know, he's on the pit crew of Evel Knievel. And his story is about this great charismatic man who's a horrible person. And it's about followers and leaders without giving too much of the plot away, Evel Knievel in this fictitious construct runs for president, and Ike and other people follow him across the country as he goes to have his voice be heard in Washington. So to a degree, it was also that one is also about followers, leaders, mobs, demagogues, and that sort of thing. But both of them are also thrillers. Both stories are thrillers. They come together at the beginning of the book, in the middle of the book, and then at the end there's a big splashy ending where the parents are involved as well.
Jake, you have to notice that all three books have a title in reference to hell or evil. What's the role? I mean, you just talked about like sort of different spheres where evil may play a role. Was that a thematic choice, or is this a case of the presence of evil isn't exactly what we see, but it appears in different places within the American experience, or some other version of that?
It's definitely the latter, but not just about the American experience, just about the human experience. The first one is called the Hellfire Club because there was actually a Hellfire Club in the UK in the 18th century. It was this debauched sex club in the outskirts of London that Benjamin Franklin visited when he went there. People can look it up. There are a couple books written about it. It was really kind of like just a place for orgies and debauchery, as I say. And the first book talks about the Hellfire Club, and one of the conceits of it is what if that group of elites in England in the 18th century, what if there was an American version that came over with Benjamin Franklin or whatever, and like there was an American version today, and what would they be doing other than orgies? And it's about secret societies and conspiracies. The next book I decided to call The Devil May Dance, because the next book is about, I told you it's about who you get into bed with when you're in politics. Part of it is about the Kennedys getting into bed with Sinatra getting into bed with the mob. It's about about those kinds of, it's about dancing with the devil. It's about like what happens to you when you get into a relationship with people of lower moral value than you, for some reason, for some quid pro quo. And so dancing with the devil seemed like a good metaphor for that. And I called it The Devil May Dance because dancing with the devil was too obvious. And I created a fake Sinatra song called The Devil May Dance. And so by then, that's two songs with the hell, two titles with the hell theme. And so I kind of had to do something devil related. I originally was going to call this book Pitchfork Island, which is a place in the book where the climax of the book takes place, Pitchfork Island. But then I came up with All the Demons Are Here because I was watching the movie The Tempest, and there's a line in the movie when they're talking about how horrible everything is at the very beginning of the movie. There's a typhoon and the shipwreck and the like, and one of the characters said, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." So I just changed it to demons, and that's where it came from. But a lot of the book is about, since all of them are thrillers, and what is a worse bad guy to evoke than the devil and pure evil, and so in some ways they're all it's all about just the human experience and bad people and confrontations with evil. It's the first time, by the way, on this book tour I've been asked that question, so good job.
Oh, well, there we go. And by the way, I was going to do my Trump impression for you next because you said quid pro quo, and I got to say there was no quid pro quo. Jake,
that's pretty good.
That was pretty good. Thank you. I appreciate that. I copied Matt Friend, but I do want to ask you because, and we're going to draw a bunch of different parallels from the book to your present job, which you just left a few minutes ago and finishing up the lead with Jake Tapper. But there was a part in the book, I wrote this down. Every time I read something, I was like, I got to ask Jake this because there's a part of the Republican caucus that wanted Nixon back. And there's folks claiming it was a liberal plot against Nixon. And I said, where the hell have I seen that before? You're writing this book and you're putting these characters into this semi-fictitious environment. Like at any point when you were writing this, were you drawing on things that are happening right now? And at any point where you're like, boy, this country has not changed one bit, that this stuff was happening?
So they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And when I go back and do the research for these novels, you really hear the rhyming today. And, whether it was Joe McCarthy for the first book and like he's out there lying and smearing people, and very few Republicans are brave enough to condemn him, or the sexism in Hollywood in the second book, or the two main plots in this book, one of which is Evel Knievel is this kind of like larger than life, shoot from the hip, showman, salesman, able to get media attention, famous for being famous, and the parallels with Donald Trump, which are just there. I mean, they're not, I didn't make them up. I mean, I goosed them in the book to make, to have him run for president, but like on Earth too, Evel Knievel could have run for president and it would have been just as credible as any other celebrity running for president, including Donald Trump. And then obviously the rise of tabloid journalism was in 1977. That's the year of the Son of Sam murders. And that's when the New York Post and the New York Daily News really came to prominence. There were just so many things going on in 1977 that reminded me of today. There was such a deep mistrust of the government and authority, because it was post-Watergate, post-Vietnam War. And we see that again today. There is, a bunch of soldiers dealing with exposure to toxins in the war. We have that today with burn pit victims. Obviously, back then it was Agent Orange. And then doing the research for this book, I listened to this great podcast by Slate called, I think it's called 1 Year. They pick a year and they just do 7 or 8 different things that happened in that year for the 7 or 8 episodes. And one of the things they did, one of the topics they focused on was a thing called Laetrile, which was this fake cure for cancer that people were obsessed with. And the health authorities in the U.S., the CDC and others, would not approve of its use because they said it's not going to cure. It doesn't cure cancer. Like you're going to kill yourself by refusing to do chemo and doing this instead. But politicians and the public were obsessed with this. Why not let us do this? You have to let us do this. And it was a real horrible story. This one little boy who had cancer, and his parents just didn't want to subject him to chemo, and they wanted him to take Laetrile. And they went to Mexico where Laetrile was prevalent and legal, and that little boy died there. And it's also, that's where Steve McQueen, you guys probably are Steve McQueen fans. Steve McQueen died in Mexico pursuing a cure for cancer based on Laetrile. And anyway, that just reminded me so much of all these fights and debates we heard during COVID about, the government is hiding this from us, and they don't want us to know about the real cure for COVID. It's ivermectin or whatever. It's just like, why do you think the government would hide that? Like, I don't even understand. But it reminded me, it was so evocative of the Laetrile debate that I built that up in it. So yeah, I mean, the rhyming is just there. You just have to know where to look for it.
Quick break from our pod to tell you about a new pod at Fresh Roasted Coffee, Envy Pods. So if you go to freshroastedcoffee.com, my partner's shaking his head. That's a good transition. Are you kidding me?
It was good. No, I shook my head. I was like, that's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I saw this picture earlier. I was like, I saw what you're doing.
It is pretty good. That's right. So listen, the new Envy Pods over at freshroastedcoffee.com, the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk, environmentally safe, compostable. You can go check these out at freshroastedcoffee.com. When you open up the package, it smells delicious. I'm telling you, you can't smell it on here, but I promise you that when I opened this morning to make my cup of coffee, it was delicious. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Use the promo code CANWEGET20 for 20% off your first order, or hit the link in our show details.
Jake, as I'm reminded of, you mentioned 1977, obviously Jonathan Mahler's book comes up often, The Bronx is Burning. And your book's obviously more global in terms of where we are in the late 70s. And obviously, just for you personally, not really that old at that point, obviously.
I was 8, yeah.
Right. So was the book a way of you for being able to sort of step back and trying to make sense of a time that may have been somewhat formative for you, but for our country, as just a period of events that seems to, like, in isolation, seem like, individual things, but collectively seems to tell a larger story of where we were at the time.
I don't remember much of 1977. I don't know what you guys remember from when you were 8 years old, but what I remember is, I remember starting to be interested in baseball. I remember Elvis dying. I remember disco, because we had, in grade school, we had, disco parties, or maybe we had like maybe one, but I remember it. I remember, I remember Star Wars coming out. I remember Saturday Night Fever coming out, and then they put it out again, and except they took out all the dirty stuff and made it PG. But I don't really remember a ton. I just don't. So this was, I mean, I knew I was going to set my next book in the 70s because I'd done the 50s and the 60s. I was going to skip it, but somebody said, no, because I thought it was lame, the 70s. The 70s has a reputation for being a lame decade. It's actually quite a fascinating decade and very wild. I mean, it really, in terms of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, if you include disco to be rock and roll, there was a lot more of it in the 70s and the 60s. And it was just fascinating diving into it. And it started with the just trying to figure out what year to do, and thinking like, well, I want to have a serial killer be part of the plot. Summer of Sam is 1977, so that's a good year for it to take place. And then I was hanging out with a friend who's obsessed with Evel Knievel, and he has a fishing lodge in Idaho, and I was not interested in Evel Knievel when I was a kid. For some reason, that just passed me by. I guess I didn't watch ABC Wide World of Sports, and he was a big figure on ABC Wide World of Sports. So maybe if I'd watched that as a kid, that would have piqued my interest. But I mean, I remember the lunch boxes, and I remember the action figure and the motorcycle that you could wind up and have it do stunts and stuff. So anyway, my friend, it was like, you really should think about, because I was like, what gives? Because he had all this Evel Knievel stuff in his lodge. Evel Knievel pinball machine, autographed photos, cover of Sports Illustrated, cover of Rolling Stone. I said, what is your deal with this guy? Because to me, he was just like a goon. I never really got it, but he's like, oh no, you're missing out. This is a great American character. And he recommended this documentary called Being Evil that Johnny Knoxville produced. And it really was a great documentary. And it really shows his impact on the culture. Like all the extreme sports stuff, all the, Tony Hawk, all these guys, Dax Shepard, Johnny Knoxville, all of them were hugely influenced by him. Anything, he's BMX bike guys. I mean, all these guys were, he took fringe stunt sports into the mainstream. And he was this larger than life character, and really interesting. And like I said, rather Trump-esque, not in a negative way, just like in this like showman way. Every politician would love to have some of that. So it really was just an education for me.
Jake, one of the things, you're talking to two journalism grads from Rutgers. So I'm really big on the Lucy character trajectory, because as she's going through different things with respect to reporting on this homicide that happened in Manassas and one that happened earlier, a few years prior, she's going back and forth with her editor about what to actually print, because they're changing parts of her story. Right. I'm paraphrasing a lot of it because I don't want to give it away for the folks. You can go order it wherever books are sold. But the big dilemmas that Lucy is having and the arguments that she's having with Harry, her editor, in the book, how much of Jake Tapper's day job crosses over into this book? Because you just did a story maybe 5 minutes ago. I was watching The Lead, and it's a new update on what the special counsel is doing with respect to Donald Trump. And you want to make sure you're putting out the accurate information. As she says, I want it to be true. I believe she says, I don't want it to be, sexed up, right? As Harry's like, we need to sex this headline up a little bit more. But how much of, when you were writing this, are you sitting there saying, boy, some of these things tend to play out in newsrooms that I'm in right now, and I'm fighting this battle between not sexing it up and just giving people the actual news and information that they need?
It's a great question. The answer is that not at all for me, is the truth. In fact, I'm one that's usually arguing that CNN needs to sex things up a little bit more. Not sex it up, but I'm usually arguing like, you're burying the lead. like this is the most important thing, and this should be, it should be higher or whatever. Not with my staff, but if I'm reading a digital story. And the truth of the matter is that I've been lucky throughout my career to have been with editors who made me better, and news desks that kept me on the straight and narrow. But I see Fox, and I read tabloids, and it's not difficult to imagine how it happens. And it's not difficult to imagine, having been in the debates about, look, this is a push and pull that any journalist is familiar with, delivering the accurate information and wanting people to read the story, and what's the best way to pull people in while also staying honest and true. Now, if you work for, the Financial Times, maybe you don't care as much, because you're just like, we're just giving, or The Economist is a better example. We're just giving people bread and butter. That's fine. But for anyone, including the Associated Press, generally speaking, you want a sexy lead, you want something that grabs people, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that debate, by the way, is probably one that's common for people in all sorts of walks of life, not just journalism. The debate between flash and substance. So that is a debate and a discussion that I'm used to. I'm not used to having it on the tabloid level, but again, it's not difficult to discern, because I see the media is so much more tabloidy today, not just the New York Post and Fox, but like everything, because it's such a competition for eyeballs that people are, they call it, whether you call it clickbait or whatever, like you're constantly always trying to get butts in the seat. So I never experienced it the way Lucy does, but I was really honored. I didn't have a book event with Maggie Haberman, the Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times reporter, but she had previously worked for the New York Daily News and the New York Post. And she was asking me, like, did I talk to tabloid reporters, because it was so true to life? And I was like, no, I just made it up. I just made it up, but it's really not that difficult to imagine how it happens. And obviously in my book, it happens worse than it could ever happen anywhere else. Just because they basically, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but they really walk a line, and it really ends up having consequences.
This is obviously book 3, right? We're 4 years ago, this series kicks off. Let's say I'm using dates from a publishing standpoint. What's different about you as a writer, researcher, just your approach to authorship? Or has there been any changes just over these 4 years from launching this novel to where these characters are?
It's a great question. I think that well, first of all, this book is more ambitious as a writerly project. The first 2 books were in third person, so just describing what Charlie did, describing what Margaret did. This book, as you know, is written in first person with 2 different characters. So Ike tells a story in one chapter, and then Lucy tells a story in another chapter. So it's more ambitious that way, both writing in first person and writing as 2 different characters, and writing as a 22-year-old woman. So I had some great editorial help with that. And like, for instance, I hired a motorcycle expert to read the first draft, because I don't know a thing about motorcycles, and I wanted to make sure Ike, in telling his story, because he's a motorcycle expert and works for Evel Knievel, who's a motorcycle expert, and there are like 3 or 4 action scenes involving motorcycles, and I wanted to make sure it read credibly to not just people like you two, but like to motorcycle experts. Like, I wanted to make sure that was legit. So, and I had a woman editor, and she, in addition to being a great editor, also helped me write as Lucy. So that's one. Like, I just got a little bit more ambitious. 2, it's gotten easier for me to what Faulkner called kill your darlings. Editing. It's gotten easier, and I go back, and I wish I had edited more out of book 1 at the Hellfire Club, I think I did a pretty good job in book two, and like a much even a better job in book three. The temptation when you write historical fiction is you find all these cool things, and then you want to share them with people because they're so cool and they made you so happy. And the I've gotten better at keeping it to myself, keeping it to myself if it doesn't advance the plot, or if it isn't an obvious delight for a reader. Like, I mean, you know, there's Star Wars is alluded to, Jaws is alluded to, Saturday Night Fever, I think, is alluded to, but they're not, you know, all these cool things that I learned about all three of those things. I didn't share because it would have distracted from the plot.
Jake, you know, by the way, I should preface this as a former person who used to work for a Murdoch entity that is on 1200 Avenue, the Americas, Fox News. I was a former Fox News PA writer. And I'm asking you this because we recently had Mehdi Hassan on from MSNBC. Love Mehdi. And
he's great.
You and him and maybe a handful of other anchors tend to have this superpower that we asked him about, which is, and again, I've been in control rooms, I've been in the studios, you know, I'm miking people up, putting the IFB in the ear. It's very hard to juggle the producer in your ear, the countdown to break, and you're trying to ask a follow-up question to a politician or somebody. You just recently had something with Ron DeSantis. That's a different setting, right?
Yeah.
What is your superpower, Jake? Like, how do you prepare, take people inside a little bit of how the lead with Jake Tapper and State of the Union with Jake Tapper prepares for an interview with a member of Congress, holding feet to fire, but also the juggling act that people don't see that is so hard with this little thing in the ear and people talking in it. And you've got to get a follow-up question now and listen to the person respond in real time.
So I don't think I have a superpower. Like, I mean, Mehdi wrote a book about how to win an argument, and I'm sure he could win any argument with me. And, you know, Mehdi is a grand inquisitor, and I don't do the same thing Mehdi does because I work for a different channel and I have a different kind of show. I really admire the hell out of him. But for instance, my DeSantis interview was not the DeSantis interview Mehdi would have done. Mehdi would have given him a grilling and a grueling, and they never would have spoken ever again. And I was doing an interview that was very different than that. It was not supposed to be a last interview with Ron DeSantis. I would say, and he's great. I would say that I don't think I have a superpower. I think that if there is anything I hope that I'm good at in terms of what might distinguish me from other people is I hope that I have a certain, and this isn't to condemn anybody, but I hope I have a certain authenticity just as me. I am the same guy on TV as I am talking to you, as I am in my car, as I am when I go home. Like it's the same. Obviously, I project a little bit more when I'm on TV, but as a general note, I hope I'm asking the questions that people at home are like, well, what about this? Or what about that? But in a way that shows that I've done some research, but is accessible. I guess that's what I think I'm okay at. But again, I'm not Peter Parker. I don't have any superpowers.
Well, I gave you the superpower. But before we let you go, Jake, because you just kind of funneled into the follow-up there, the camera's off. One of the big drawbacks of CNN Plus not making it was you were going to do some content on there, which kind of showed Jake Tapper taking, you know, the shirt off and relaxing a little bit.
Well, the jacket,
not the shirt. Okay, not the shirt, not the shirt. Sorry about that.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, my wife will get a thing out of that.
I'm 54. I don't know if anybody wants me to take my shirt off, but okay.
Exactly. Well, you know what I meant. But so take us a little bit inside what Jake Tapper is like off air, because camera just turned off. You literally just recorded the lead a little while ago as we're doing this interview. And now you're about to go home. You got the drive home. You're going to relax. You're going to read. You listen to the podcast. What is Jake Tapper like off camera, Monday through Friday and on the weekends?
So generally speaking, I would say I'm pretty much the same. I probably curse a little bit more, especially when I'm around like my college friends. I probably have a much darker, sicker sense of humor than I would allow people to see on TV. But generally, it's not that different. I mean, I'll go home tonight and then I'll hang out with my son. And if my daughter permits me, she's 15, I'll hang out with her a little bit. And then mainly I'll just sit down with my wife and we'll just talk about our days and honestly, we just try to make each other laugh. And that's really it. But I don't think I'm that different. I really don't. I mean, again, the subject matters might be a little bit more twisted. Like I'll talk more about darker jokes about my friends, or to their faces, of course, or more about pop culture. I'm much more into pop culture in my private life than I am on TV. We used to try to cover pop culture more, but the audience didn't really like it that much. They weren't really that interested, and it was kind of a surprise to me because we would try to do it through stories that were on the news. Like we interviewed Bradley Cooper when he was playing the American Sniper. We interviewed Jake Gyllenhaal when he played a survivor of the Boston Marathon bombing, et cetera, et cetera. Generally speaking, our audiences don't want that from me. They don't want entertainment related stuff. I mean, maybe like a small feature here and there. So anyway, that's just a long way of saying that I'm much more into pop culture in my private life. I go home, I do not watch the news. I go home and I watch movies or TV or read a book.
Well, in between hosting The Lead with Jake Tapper, State of the Union Sundays, hanging out with Jennifer Aniston and Adam Scott at a party, he wrote this incredible book. It's a New York Times best-selling book. All the Demons Are Here. You can go get it wherever books are sold. Jake, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. And truly, as an admirer of yours, somebody who watches The Lead every afternoon and watches State of the Union every other weekend when you're co-hosting with Dana Bash, I truly appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Continued success to you, sir, and please stay safe.
Thank you so much, Mike and Nick. You do a great show, and I really appreciate the time. You've been wonderful hosts.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.